All right, so tonight, welcome, and we are finishing The Essence of Zen tonight by Sekkei Harada. And tonight we are reading the Afterword, and then you've been asked to look through the text and everybody contribute in your comment on a piece of writing in this that inspired you or meant something deep or important to you and what have you. So, but before we begin, and maybe it's my commentary, what I think is important, but I've had several people say to me, oh, well, he said, don't follow anything I say. And I would like to just make a little comment about that. Several people I have heard say that in the past week, I guess. And I think he doesn't mean don't pay attention to anything that's in the book. After all, he says many, many times, I'm telling you the truth here. And so when he says, don't pay any attention to me personally, he means me as my personality of Harada Roshi, but pay attention to the truth in the book and the teachings that are there and absorb them and examine them and then find out what that is, what that truth is. So he doesn't exactly mean it the way we have joked about it. Oh, well, he says, don't pay attention to me. And I think it's important that we can sort of, toss it off a little bit, even though you may have been kidding and not tossing it off, any of you. But he means that we should pay attention. And so I will just start off with my reading on that. He says, you don't have to go, this is on page 107. He says, the fact is, though, that you won't understand unless you study the Buddhist teachings and listen to what I have to say at least once. So he says that, and he says, and if you don't, it will be as if you are sailing on the ocean without a chart. You will have no idea which way to go or how to get to your destination. That is why I talk to you, even though essentially it isn't really necessary. And it isn't necessary if we are truly engaged in the Dharma, because the Dharma is our true teaching. If we are truly engaged in Zazen, then that is our true teacher, the Dharma and Zazen. So it isn't necessary, of course, for him to speak. But he says, just listen to what I have to say at least once. So examine the points that he has made, make them your own, absorb them, listen carefully, and make them a part of practice, a part of the way. So, okay, so we have this afterword then, which is on page 157. And he says, if you really know yourself, you can use the world as a basis to decide what you want to do. But if you really know yourself, that means that we experience the truth. We really experience what he has been saying throughout this text. And once again, he reminds us that it is not the ego self that we are calling up. We are calling up something greater than the small self. And he says that to meet our true self is the purpose of human life. It's our true purpose, and so it is our life work to know this, to know ourselves, and to go beyond the ego self. So he expounds a little bit on the next page also. The teaching that Buddha expounded was that the existence of things with and without form is separate from human thought. Well, that's a big statement. That's a big statement to unpack. The teaching that Buddha expounded was that the existence of things with and without form is separate from human thought. And then we ask, well, what do we think about that? As we say, it's beyond human thought. The appearance and disappearance of things has absolutely no connection with the ego self. As all things are formed through conditions, they have no center or substance. For that reason, things are constantly changing. They are impermanent. They have no beginning and end, are selfless, and cannot be perceived. They are formless. So here again, Roshi lays down a paragraph that is worth a life study, is worth very deep consideration. And once again, he points out that we create our own fantasy by thinking that something that cannot be perceived is reality. So this afterword, once again, he is telling us that we perceive ourselves to be something in particular, and that perception is false. That is itself is delusion. That perception is delusion. So this delusion is within the thought of the ego self. This is a very difficult thing for us to sort through and to unpack and to consider within ourselves. And it takes some work, my friends, and some important sitting with oneself, quietness, and just letting the sentence lay down in the middle of the heart and, fleshing it out for ourselves. And he says also, the Dharma of birth, old age, sickness, and death has absolutely no relation to the ego self. They appear and disappear, appear and appear and disappear, and they appear and disappear, and that's the end of it. It's that simple. We are born, we experience old age if we are lucky. There is sickness within that, and death, and that's just how it is. We appear and disappear. And that has no relation to the ego self. We like to think that we were born and we became ourselves and we became this particular self and personality and so forth. And yet he's saying that the fact that we're here has nothing to do with our own ego self. So anyway, what maybe you have some questions about the afterword, and then I'd really like to hear from all of you. What I'd like to hear is maybe a passage that you picked out that you thought was useful to you or important or inspiring, and maybe you could expound on it a little bit and tell us, unpack that for us and tell us what that means for you. But first, anybody have any questions about the afterword?
I guess for me, I read the afterword and then I went poking around in the book from the beginning, reading his introduction, and I didn't get all the way through going through the book and looking for the passages that meant the most to me. But I think I always like to see how an afterword and an introduction relate to each other. Mm-hmm. They're like bookends, yes. Really, of someone's effort. And I think I don't have anything brilliant to say about that, but I do think that there is a certain mirroring that goes on where he lets us know in the introduction something about the ego self and the delusion of the ego self, and then spends the book examining that, and then leads us to this afterword that I found really powerful. I thought the afterword was, I mean, I think you could just read the afterword and
It's the whole book.
talk about it for weeks. Especially the passage that you went straight to, the teaching that Buddha expounded on page 158. I thought that was just such a heart-swelling passage. And so to me, it just sort of he set up the thing with the introduction, and he wrapped it up. And I suppose in many ways, you're left sort of overwhelmed at that afterword. And yet it's, to me, it was very settling. This idea that we have built this ego self that is so not really about our bodies ticking through space and time.
And certainly in the introduction, he says some heavy duty stuff. I mean, he says, speaking of the near future, as long as there is no coexistence or mutual support among people, mankind will become extinct in the 21st century. I can't hear you, Karen.
I read that and promptly put it on my Facebook page because I thought that and it really resonated with people right away. But I think the hard part is the last sentence, is only by awakening to the law of causality is it possible to stop these particular deluding passions of being human. And so then you're left with unpacking, well, what is the law of causality? And he starts that with, what does it mean? Well, I had a question of, let's see, that's on page 2. There is, let's see, where is it? All things come into existence through conditions and they disappear because of conditions. This is what we call the law of causality. And then somewhere, the only thing that is important is whether a person is now truly practicing in accordance with the law of causality.
Yes.
And wow. And what does that even look like? And then I think he spends the whole book trying to explore that.
Right. And there is no ego intervention in the law of causality, which is what we also just said, that there is no connection of the ego self in the appearance and disappearance of things. There's no ego self in birth, death, sickness, and whatever those are. So we must awaken to that. It's extremely important that we awaken to that and realize that deeply, or we will go extinct. Or he says we could. He doesn't say we could, but he says, mankind will become extinct in the 21st century if we do not pay attention to this. But any country has implications for the whole world, he is pointing out. So our mutuality, recognizing our mutuality is extremely important. And here we are in the midst of this COVID, and we aren't even able to look at the mutuality of mask wearing and the importance of caring for one another in this situation. It's a big eye-opening for us, a big lesson for us, but we have a lot to learn even just in that.
Yeah, in so many ways, I think people, for example, with climate change, it's such a, it's gases, it's atmospheric, it's invisible in many respects. But with the pandemic, we're given this very, obvious indication of mutuality, and yet we're still so challenged.
Yes. Yeah. So what else would you like to say about the bookends, the introduction and the afterword. Anything else you'd like to point out in that?
I don't think so. I think that this idea of causality and conditions, and how it relates to the ego self versus the true self seem to me to be what's cooking in the introduction and what is cooking in the afterword.
I mean, essentially, here we are in whatever condition we are in, whatever our situation, that's it. To live it, to embrace it, to take it as our own. And
he opens it by saying that the character for Zen implies that Zen is extremely clear and concise teaching. And I think throughout though we might be mystified at times as we read this book, I think he endeavors to always offer clarity and conciseness in what he's telling us, even to the point of saying, look at this thing. Really listen to this thing I'm telling you. And then he concludes it with what is really, what I scribbled beneath it was a piece from way back in page 13 in the first part, which is, you are already within the way. And so, that is both comforting and concise. In much the same way that the introduction offers that notion of conciseness and clarity.
Okay, thank you. That's good start, because we've got the introduction and the bookends, and now we've got the interior that others maybe would like to speak to. So, yeah, anybody want to go next? Who will be next?
I'll go next.
Okay.
There were so many good things in this book, and I almost just wanted to take the whole afterword and say that this is it. But one of the things that kept coming back to me in the last couple of weeks was on page 153, Kyozan's question. So the second paragraph, and he says, what would happen if all things arose at the same time? All things refers to myriad things or phenomena. It is everything that a human being can imagine. If all such things were to arise at once, what should I do? And then he says, of course, right after that, I think each of you encounters this situation every day. And I was thinking that every time I open my eyes, there's these myriad things. There's the whole world arising, all of the myriad things arising at once. And it can become overwhelming if I see myself as just the ego self, as in the midst of all of this. And I just, when I open my eyes and everything appears, before I even think about it, everything is meeting perfectly. And I mean, the Dharma meets Dharma. And so it's so, if I forget the ego self for a moment, this body and mind is just part of that. And it's just part of the functioning of the activity of the Dharma. And even if I don't like, the ego self, maybe I don't like what's happening, or I see some injustice, or something that I don't necessarily even need to think about it. It's just to act that's the activity of the Dharma as well. And that's the meeting of Dharma, kind of a face-to-face meeting of all things. And so it's just been percolating for the last week or so. So that's the one that have been most recently thinking about.
Good. It's a lot to work with. When we pick out a section like that, we discover ourselves working with and around it and observing it more closely each time. So thank you. That's very nice. Very nice. And we very recently, just a couple of weeks ago, just last week, we spoke about that one.
Okay.
About that chapter. Yes. So it's, should be quite familiar to everyone, because certainly when you go through a book like this, by the time, each week comes around, you can't remember. It's a bathing. We just keep bathing in it. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to remember sections. You really have to go back and look and work with them. So, okay, thank you. Thank you, Allison. Someone else?
I'll go. No, I just found the afterword. I mean, it dense, and it's just like when you think about. It's like, how do you even respond to it? It's sort of like you could either agree with it or not, which is itself sort of this dualistic response. And since it's just so abstract, to engage it would be, I think, the most philosophical thing you could do, more or less. But that idea, I guess I never really heard anyone say that the ego self doesn't have anything to do with causality. Mm. And I find that a really strange thing. Because if the ego self doesn't exist in causality, then how could it cause suffering? How could we know it?
Yeah. So where was your ego self when you were born?
Well, where was my ego self before I was born?
When you were born?
Well, I didn't have one yet.
Yeah, right. So that's what he is suggesting, is that you were born without worry of the ego self. And the ego self is something we pick up as we go along. And so your birth and that causality is not about the ego.
But I always I guess I thought of like reconciling our egos was sort of coming to terms with causality. Mm. As if like the two are intrinsically linked. Mm. And I guess my sort of question, like overall for the book, it's sort of like, what's the difference with the ego self just buying into being the true self and taking on that narrative and dissolving?
Sure.
Because I don't think that those are any different.
Okay. So I think when he talks about causality and ego self, there certainly are conditions in which the ego self creates some kind of causality. But what he is saying is that birth, sickness, old age, and death are conditions that have nothing to do with the ego self. But all kinds of other things might have to do with the ego self. But those particular conditions have nothing whatsoever to do. Your ego is not there, and I suspect your ego won't be there when you are dying either.
But I would say, like, when I was born, I also didn't have a notion of causality.
So, but there was no ego self to worry about whether there was causality or not.
Or to appreciate it.
Sure. So it's
Or-
simply not a condition of the ego self. Simple, just like that.
I don't know. And maybe it's not even a compelling point to make, but it just doesn't seem like feasible to me that we get rid of our ego. It's just that because we don't get rid of causality ever.
Sure. And so all I have been saying all the way along is that when you have an awakening experience, the ego is seen through and it is no longer problematic. That's all. It is simply not problematic.
So,
And
and why I like that, I think why, to me, like what you just said, how that differs from Harada Roshi's teaching, it's that I keep thinking that he's trying to highlight how the ego changes.
No, I do not think he is saying that. He
Okay.
is saying that the ego completely dissolves.
Well, that's the difference. I don't hear what you just said as saying that the ego self dissolves.
Well,
just that it's no longer problematic.
It is not.
But
And
to
so-
say that it dissolves is sort of to create a dualistic notion then, because it's dissolving when it used to have had more permanence. So it does entail this change of state.
Awakening does, yes.
But I don't. Maybe it's not compelling or it's semantics. I don't know. It just seems like that's a big. That to me is just different than saying things are no longer problematic. Because that's like an internal existential coming to terms with what suffering is, not like changing something like energetically or dynamically and how your psyche works or how you understand yourself or how you operate in the world.
Well, all I can say, Will, it's something that you're going to spend a lot of time working on. That it's something you must work out for yourself. And that, we can argue, well, we're not arguing, but we can go around and around and around on it. But it's something that you will have to work out and come to terms with. And that's all Harada Roshi is saying, that you attend to it, you look at it, you work it out so that you can say, I am okay, I know myself well enough that I have touched the truth within myself. That's what he's after. And not so much whether there is ego or there's not ego at that point. It's that you have touched the truth in yourself.
Well, I guess let's just see how my quote relates to that then, because I feel like maybe it does.
Okay.
It's the first full paragraph on 105. The task of a Zen master has been described as stealing the farmer's cow or snatching the beggar's bowl. That is, taking away a person's most important possession. The thought of Zen, the Dharma, the way of Buddha, your Zazen practice, and the idea of yourself. It means taking away all these things. If the farmer's cow or the beggar's bowl is taken away, there's nothing left for them to do. As long as someone is desperately clinging to such things, it is impossible to die the great death. That is, to truly give up your ego self. But I just wonder, it's like, is there any chance that this sort of is Sekkei Harada Roshi's ego narrative?
No.
Well, how?
It just isn't.
Then what is it?
He is telling you the truth of Dharma.
From where?
From his experience of emptiness.
How is that not the ego?
It is not the ego.
But it's not my experience of the Dharma. it's not the selves. It's like he's communicating it through an individual perception.
Sure, but if you say my experience of the Dharma, that is from an ego position. Because the experience of the Dharma is that when in the experience of awakening, it is not personal. It is not my experience of enlightenment or my experience of emptiness. And I'm not talking about me personally, I'm saying anybody's experience of awakening is, it belongs to everyone. And there is no longer a suggestion that it is something of mine in any way whatsoever. It is a collective awakening. And that is what we say, that when the Buddha awakened, we all awakened. When somebody awakens, we all awaken. So it isn't Harada Roshi, but it is Harada Roshi doing the teaching here. But he is not teaching from his ego, believe me.
But it just seems to me, it's like the ego's what generates language in duality. It's what engages in matters of thought, such as books. I mean, is it not possible that he
did not
made his ego this?
He did not write this book. This book is a compilation of his lectures delivered in a zendo, in a teaching situation, in which he was speaking from the third eye and not from, I think I will sit down and write this book. These are his teachings in person with other people.
But I think saying that you're sitting with your third eye open could be just as dualistic as deciding to write a book.
I'm not going to talk with you about this anymore because you are creating problems by the language. And we have the gift of language, and language is also our awakening. We can use language to awaken, which is what he has done here.
How is my language not open like his?
Because I think you are suggesting that he is coming from an ego position. And it's not. It's to not understand perhaps the intent of his work and where that arises from. It arises from his pure stand in emptiness, his rootedness in emptiness, and his rootedness in the Dharma. And then the question is the ego coming out? Is the ego Dharma coming out from a place, a rootedness of emptiness? And he says, no, that cannot be. And I know that you and I have had some discussions too about the question of ego, and it's something you need to work out. And I'm not saying that you are egotistical or anything like that, but if you are studying psychology, you've got a dualistic issue to deal with when you are talking about the Dharma versus psychology. And so you've got and philosophy. So you've got a dualistic problem that you need to work out in terms of when you stand in the Dharma or when you stand in psychology. And it may be that because you are still studying, psychology may be dominant for you right now. And so you don't stand completely in the Dharma until you do.
I guess a challenge for me then from that is, I think as a consequence of what we're talking about, it's like there are people who are qualified to make this distinction and then they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't seem evident to me. It's like, how could I tell? Who knows the difference and who doesn't?
If you continue in your practice wholeheartedly and fully, you will recognize who is speaking truth to you. That's all. You rely on the Dharma, and you will find yourself in the company of those who speak truth to you.
I think that is an incredible answer.
All right. Who would like to speak? Yes, Jerry.
Well, the line in the book, which was most important to me and which originally drew my attention to the book. I was perusing books in the Olympia, in your library, and looking through this and that. And I'm, for a long time, been focused on the Fukan Zazengi and one or two other texts. And I saw that this was a translation of the Fukan Zazengi, and I wanted to see what he had to say. I don't particularly know Harada Roshi. And as I read along, he came to the section in which he says, what should you do with your mind when you're sitting? And there are numbers of different translations. It's what are you thinking of? And the master says, I'm thinking of not thinking. And how do you think of not thinking? He says non-thinking in many of the translations. But in this book, he said, how do you think of non-thinking? By leaving thinking as it is. And that, I said, that goes to something that speaks to me. This is great. Because with some sort of enlightenment experience, one of the traps, and in the Fukan Zazengi, it's mentioned fairly close to the beginning, is to think that you have some insight. And you have had some insight. But you've almost lost the essential way, is what Dogen says.
Yes.
Because it is typical to want to recreate it, or to once again have such freedom or confidence. And so you retain an idea of what it is. And as you're sitting, you judge yourself. And this is the antidote, or an antidote to it. And it goes with some other things that Dogen has to say. For example, in the Zazen Shin, he says, there is a practice of a Buddha that does not seek to make a Buddha. And in Beginner's Mind, which I've read over and over again, the first fascicle was particularly opaque to me. I could not understand it. The one on posture. Because what Suzuki Roshi says at the end of that is he's speaking of taking the posture and the particular state of mind. He says the state of mind that exists when you sit in the right posture is itself enlightenment. If you cannot be satisfied with the state of mind you have in Zazen, it means your mind is still wandering about. Our body and mind should not be wobbling or wandering about. In this posture, there is no need to talk about the right state of mind. You already have it. This is the conclusion of Buddhism. And I could not reconcile that with any particular sense of enlightenment. I could not see what that really entailed. I can see now, or begin to see, that there's a question of really accepting oneself without any judgment, but taking another step forward. Now that's not so easy, and I don't actually live from that. I'm not actually able to actualize that, or I have not well actualized that. That's long practice. But the line in Harada in the book we've been looking at, The Essence of Zen, is how should you do thinking on your cushion? So instead of judging oneself or trying to recreate an idea of what you thought you had, to just sit quietly without trying to do anything and leaving the thoughts as they come and go, arise and disappear, was struck me. And much in the rest of the book as well, but that particularly was the line which was most important to me, in at least drawing my attention to this book and to Harada Roshi.
So how long have you been sitting Zazen, Jerry? 55 years, maybe.
Something like that, since about 64.
Yeah. So I simply want to say to those who are listening, the learning never ends. Our awakening never ends. I mean, that is what's so beautiful about being in practice in the Dharma, is that we are still at the beginning. We still are learning. We still are unfolding and uncovering and opening. And so that's very beautiful in that sense, is so we don't get somewhere. We just keep unfolding. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Jerry. Yeah.
Thank you.
1964. Wow. Some of us weren't born yet.
Oh boy. Edo-san, can I jump in?
Sure.
I want to kind of piggyback on what's been said so far. I'm always reading several books at one time, and this book kind of sent me to another book that I have on my shelf. It's called 10 Theories of Human Nature, and the authors examine various views from Confucianism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And there was one passage there that struck me, and I think, anyway, I connected it with what we're talking about here. When he says, as with other Buddhist teachings, the claim that life is suffering is not to be taken as an ultimate doctrinal statement about the nature of reality, but rather as a statement about the experiential reality of human beings. So it's not that the living itself is suffering, it's that our experience of living is suffering, and our experience of this suffering stems from and here I jump back to Harada Roshi, commentary 1, where he's talking about you are already within the way. And on page 14, he says these 5 things, and they're things that Dogen mentions. Delusion, illusory thoughts, confused ideas, increase and decrease, and mistaken understanding are what we usually refer to as deluding passions. For bodhisattvas, these 5 delusions, these realities, are enlightenment. But for an ordinary person, these 5 aspects of enlightenment are deluding passions. Depending on whether the ego self is forgotten or not, these realities as they are become either enlightenment or illusions. The difference is that profound. And so I'm wondering, is forgetting the self the same as allowing the self to be as it is? The self isn't going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, is that just part of the whole, I guess maybe I'll rephrase it. From a bodhisattva's point of view, is forgetting the self the same as allowing the self to be as it is?
I suppose if you are talking about the big self, I mean, we have to call it that,
No, I'm actually talking about the ego self, forgetting the ego self.
Sure. So the question again is
Is
forgetting.
this forgetting of the ego self tantamount to allowing the ego self to be as it is? It's part of
Sure.
the general flow of things.
Sure. It's that you go about your day and you do not be concerned about the issue of the ego because
Mhm.
we're involved in living.
And also recognizing when it's intruding into things.
Of course, naturally.
I guess that's, I mean, clearly I haven't taken that step where I can let go of all of this, but
So who are you when you're out in your garden and you are just with the garden?
oh my. In the garden, I could be wondering, the sun is warm, it's humid, there are bugs flying around. I mean, all sorts of things are happening.
But you're just in the environment of the garden and you aren't thinking, oh, is this my ego experiencing the bugs?
Right, true.
Yeah.
I'm not obsessing about who is pulling the weeds
Right.
or
Right.
oh.
And this is essentially all Harada is saying. Go about your life and live.
Okay. Just forgetting, I mean, it's so central to what he's saying. I mean, in some ways, going back to that original quote that Karen mentioned, you know, I mean, our extinction hinges on can we deal with this in an adequate way? So,
yeah. At least adequate.
Yes.
At the very least. Yeah. But
okay.
So I mean, I think that, you know, there's the worry about when I go about my day and I just live, there's the worry. We can become hyper vigilant about worrying about the ego and whether the ego self is operating. And that hyper vigilance is the ego operating.
It's the ego operating, yes. Yes.
And it's extra. It's a head on top of a head or riding a horse on top of a horse.
Yes.
So, as we spoke about last week, so, you know, not necessary to worry about it.
Okay.
But that's a nice passage, Bob, a very nice passage on page 14. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So I would
Yes.
like to say a little bit.
Please.
I was reading this book with a Kindle, you know, so I had to write down the parts, so I cannot go so quickly from this part to this. So I tried to, what was important or was touching me very deep was the chapter of repentance. I don't know why, but I read it after there was a lot of things coming up of the past that I was feeling deeper through how I hurted people in my life. And after this coming up with also a lot of feelings and crying about it, suddenly like a new window opening up that I could see how I hurted people in the past with my ignorance and with my behavior of not being aware. After that, I was reading this chapter and I was thinking, oh my God. And he is talking about a fundamental touchstone in repentance. In practice, it's a fundamental touchstone is repentance, and Buddhist practice begins with repentance. And there was this one sentence that he is saying, In fact, so the teaching is that the point we thought was the end is actually the place where practice begins. And this is something that is going through the whole book is we are coming to points when we think, oh, now we realize something, but then a new window is opening up, sometimes through our daily life, in meeting with situations and with people and with our emotions that we thought we are now able to look through everything, and then suddenly there comes this sentence, what we thought was the end is the beginning, and it begins every time new. It's like that this is never ending. And this was a very it still begins, and practice begins new every time new. I don't know how to put this in words. This part was very touching me. And the other part is about not forgetting the true self, about the true self, about finding the true self. And there's, I don't know if I find it now, there's one sentence that reminded me when I was beginning with practice. Sorry, I have to look it up. I cannot find it now, but I try to put it in words. It's how we are seeking the true self with a loving, with something, don't know how to say, with a loving mind, with a thirsty, loving mind we are seeking. And I was reminded that this was, I have to come back to this. And there's also something I always have to come back to, not one time, but reminding me, why did I come to the Kashan? To seek for this true self. And how do I do that? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Gita. Thank you. That is our life question. How do we do this?
And he also speaks, it's like falling in love with the true. And I don't know where this sentence is. Cannot find it now.
No, I know exactly the sentence. We've spoken about it. We mentioned it last week. That we take it up with love, that we
here it is. I found it now. It's okay. In the Lotus Sutra are the following words: seek the real self with an adoring, loving mind, with a thirsty, longing mind. With this attitude, please seek the true self. Buddhist practice must be done reflecting the same attitude as being in love. I would like you to search for the true self with a loving, longing mind.
I remember that. It was beautiful. Beautiful, exactly. Yeah.
And sometimes I guess we forget that we, in the beginning, were so searching for it and longing for it, and with this power also, inside.
Right. For those of you who are looking for that sentence, it's at the top of the page on 153. Buddhist practice must be done reflecting the same attitude as being in love. So I would like you to search for the true self with a loving mind, loving, longing mind. So page 153 for those of you who'd like to check that section. Thank you, Jutta.
Thank you.
Well, he also is very similar in the Afterword. I wrote this down. He says, in our lifetime, there is only one person we must encounter, one person we must meet as though we were passionately in love. That person is the essential self, the true self. So he says it again in a different way about searching passionately. That really struck me.
Yes. Yeah, so you get this sense, although I've mentioned that Harada Roshi is very ordinary, at the same time, we have these moments in which we see this passion in the Dharma for him, that he has, he's passionate. This is his true partner in life, is his practice, and the Dharma is his true partner. So, Joan, would you like to go then, as long as you are talking? Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's so many quotes. I wrote down like 4 pages of quotes. So, but the one that I circled and put a star by it was the one that you started out with, Ado, where he talks about there's no coexistence. As long as there's no coexistence or mutual support among people, mankind will become extinct in the 21st century. Or I guess maybe Karen talked about that. Mm-hmm. And I just, I see that in the world, and it's really disturbing to actually have it confirmed by him, because it seems like we are in such a position of, as humanity is in such a crossroads right now of going one way or the other. It's still a question mark. And it really is up to individuals making choices, because right after that he says, people don't feel the need to know the true essence of things. They are stuck in this condition of ignorance and consequently neglect to inquire into what is real. I don't know collectively how we move in that direction, but it does seem like it's a matter of what he says, extinction or not extinction.
Somewhere, didn't he say if only 1 or 2 people would come forward who are truly awake, that things would change? And so, this, whether we can produce some leaders, perhaps, may be one of the issues. Whether we can leaders who can come forward, who would truly lead and change with profound strength of Dharma. And I don't think that we have a leader right now anywhere in the United States.
Definitely not in the United States.
No. I mean, big leader. We've got some people certainly leading strong communities, but big leader, I don't think we have one right now. Certainly no one has come forward. It could be that if the need is strong, someone will come forward, some people will come forward, but right now we don't have that. So we'll see. We'll see how it works out. But it's something worth considering, his saying that. It certainly behooves all of us to pay deep attention to our own practice and to really allow it to unfold and allow the ego self to diminish in a way that allows the big self to expand. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but we can do that.
I do feel, his book is so encouraging. And I felt really encouraged to continue practice, to look more deeply into the ego self, to really get focused. So, he's really given us a gift with his book, because almost like a direct transmission.
Oh, it totally is. Totally is. Yeah. Okay, Joan, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, we've got some people left here. Brian?
Sure, I'll say something. I'm sorry that I missed the last couple of weeks. I didn't have the assignment for this week to prepare, but I do want to just say that it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to be part of this conversation over the last couple of months, and I'm deeply grateful for all of you who've been here along the way. My book, the parts that I was here for, and some other parts are full of underlines and stars and circles and notes and underlined notes and questions and comments that all of you have made. So it's just been really, there's just so much in here. This is really rich, rich text, a rich conversation. I think the piece that I keep coming back to is it's related to the section on page 120, awakening to the chaos within you. They tell the story about Kantan and how Kantan's essence was destroyed by being made in the likeness of being reshaped in the likeness of two men. And I have underlined here, in the same way we meddle with Kantan inside ourselves. I would like you to be aware of that. And that references me to page 27, where it says, do not interfere with the workings of the mind, means not meddling with your thoughts, which are the essential functioning of the mind. This is to entrust yourself to this function as it is, without bringing forth the ego self. In other words, abandon and forget the ego self. And immediately above that is a really powerful quote. Do not think of good or bad, right or wrong. Do not interfere with the workings of the mind, nor try to control the movements of your thoughts. Give up the idea of becoming a Buddha. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. I'm just that's something that's really settled in deeply into my practice over the last couple of months, and I guess I would also say that if I can find it. Oh yeah, this was something somebody said. Maybe you, Edo-san, or maybe partially what you said, and maybe some other comments interpreted by me. What do we do when we get off the cushion? We continue practicing zazen.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that. I mean, and that's an important chapter, the awakening to the chaos within you. It's one of the shorter ones, and yet meddling with something. Always meddling. We're always meddling, aren't we? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Brian. And Gilda.
Thank you, Edo-san.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have to say first thank you to the Sangha. I came in towards not quite the middle of the book. And I'd have to say my favorite part that I have been studying has been the glossary. understanding what words mean. Well, at least on the surface. So to understand what Zazen means. So now I have an idea that it means sitting on the cushion. That's as far as I am. So to study the chapter that speaks about Zazen, and then like what Brian, I think, just said about the cushion going with you. The reason I keep coming back every week is that there's something that is said from the readings and from our discussions that when I go and I do my meditation in the evenings, when I do my Zazen, my quietness is getting longer. So I also, like Yuta, I also very much appreciated both the reading on repentance and our discussion around it. I think what I recall best, because every week when I come, I take lots and lots of notes, and then I read it afterwards, and it may not make a lot of sense right away. But what I remember about repentance is you just have to say that you're sorry interiorly, I believe, and that's it. That was helpful to me. And I want to continue to study understanding the small self and the true self. So the other day I was walking and the sun was setting and the Olympics were in the background, and I was listening intentionally to a classical piece of music by a composer called Holst, and it's called The Planets. Mm-hmm. And I was listening to a piece called Venus, the bringer of peace, all at the same time. And it's like, that was a moment for me. So it's coming every week. It's doing reading to the best of my capacity. It's going to glossary. I've read what the precepts are. And it's been, for me, a gift to be with you, with the Sangha, and trying to understand how to learn more about the Dharma. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Gilda. And I'm so glad you came, that, we ran into one another 20 years ago or something like that. And you showed up now, and that's so courageous of you, and in such good spirit. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Jason, you have something?
Hi, hello. I definitely want to say thank you for these. Thank you so much. I always feel so much better after doing this. It's Wednesdays are such a long day of Zoom meetings, but this is definitely worth an extra push to come to these. There's so much. To be brief, I think I did have a bit of a problem with that afterword part with the ego self not being connected to causality, but I kind of chose not to take it completely literally, and just kind of, but at the same time I was looking at it, well, what if it's all laid out? In one sense, the ego self is driven by forces we don't really understand. So, it's kind of like the bubbling up of a lot of stuff. And yeah, it's interesting. What I was going to go with that basically is, be brief. I think it's a matter of perspective. I think when you have those experiences, as I understand it, one has those experiences, and it's like a zooming out, and the ego self is there, but it's less consequential. It's a matter of perspective that it dissolves. It doesn't dissolve so much, but it dissolves from your awareness, in a sense that, yeah, you're aware of it, but it doesn't matter so much. It's not the whole driver of the story. You start to, as I understand it, you see a larger story, a larger picture. And so it's a matter of perspective. And reading the book and discussion and bringing it into life. And it's really, I've come to this, and I'll just wrap it up with, I've come to this question that I've asking myself, and it's kind of helping me. And it's, where's Buddha right now in this moment? Where's Buddha? That helps. It helps me kind of like snap out of it and forget, like zoom out in a sense. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jason. Cynthia, you're here for the first time tonight, but maybe you've been reading the book and just not coming online with us.
Actually, I have not been. I just started reading the book today because I just finally decided I really wanted to come to these meetings. So I really don't have any particular passage to talk about, but I've been learning a lot from listening to everybody else and feeling encouraged and inspired to continue reading this book and also to get back to my practice, which I've neglected for many years.
Yeah. Well, I would suggest that we've all come in and out many times, perhaps. Even when we're practicing, we come in and out. So anyway, well, welcome. I'm really glad you came tonight. So we have this question then about continuing. I really want to continue, but I think we should take a brief break and come back maybe the first week of September. Certainly we'll email everybody. Cynthia, are you on our mailing list? Do you get our newsletter? Is that how you got here, through the newsletter?
I don't think so. I think I actually followed you on Facebook, and I saw the announcements for that.
Okay, all right. Maybe go to our website and send your email via the contact page, so that when we send out the newsletter, you'll know what we're going to be doing, because I always post those on the newsletter, what we're going to be reading and talking about.
Okay.
And I know that it probably feels like a long time between now and the first week of September, and it does. I mean, as I pointed out, here's the book. This is what's coming. I think it will be published on about August 15th, So please buy it as soon as it's out. I'll be posting it on the newsletter, of course, and you will see that. A Blueprint of Enlightenment, Gien Inoue. And that is the next text that we will take up. It's different. It's different from what we've been doing, but it's certainly about enlightenment, about awakening. So it will be more of the same in a sense, with a different teacher. And what do you want to do? Do you want to meet on Wednesday night, even if we don't read something, and check in and see how people are, or what's your pleasure, friends? I mean, I feel like this parting is.
Edo-san, I was going to say, I know that the center usually takes a certain number of weeks off in August,
yes,
and to honor that for sure. But I'm wondering if we could maybe take up different articles that are available online each one. Just do a different article each Wednesday.
Yeah.
Even some of us could volunteer to facilitate, and so that you have a break. Like there was one that I came across recently that had to do with, and it was by I think she's a Vipassana instructor or teacher who's Black, who was reframing the Four Noble Truths in terms of the fact that reflecting on suffering is, if you're Black, you see it in a different way, that
right.
teaching. So just taking up, for example, something like that might be associated with some of the discourse that's been going on, as a little break from the serious foundational texts.
Right. Okay. Well, that sounds very good, and I'm happy to participate. Why don't you send that, and I'll post that on the newsletter either tomorrow or the day after. And then would you like to facilitate that conversation next week? I mean, I'll be there, and I'll bring us all onto line here.
Sure.
And
I'd be happy to.
Yeah. And then I think that we'll close down. We usually close down the last 2 weeks before Labor Day. So we still might do that so everybody gets a short break. And I think Labor Day is September 7th this year.
Okay.
So so we'd come 7, 8, and so September 9th, I think, would be when we could begin the new book. But I think that's a great idea. I do feel during the COVID, and because we don't do other online work, I just feel that, you know, there's a sense of losing connection, and I'm not keen to see that happen. So it'd be September 9th when we would begin the new book. And, but meantime, we can continue, and then we would be away from here the 26th of August and September 2nd. So those would be 2 away days. But otherwise, we still have quite a few weeks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks still that we can do articles. And I think that's a nice idea, Karen. So you're on next week, and other people can take turns then facilitating. And then send me, if you've got an article you want, please send me the article and I will post it or email it to the people who are here. I took a photo tonight so I can see who you are, and I know who other people are too who've been here. So I could send you the article to read, even if we don't post it, or you know, a way to get to it. I think we can connect to a PDF in that way on the newsletter. So, okay, very good. That's a great idea. So thank you for that. All right. Yeah, I mean, during this pandemic, it just keeps getting more and more weird. So we do our best and keep in touch and hang in there, everybody. Take care of yourselves, especially now. There's the temptation to want to go out and hang around and so forth. And yet, with the COVID on the rise right now, it's really serious that it's really important that we, as best we can, stay close to home and, you know, keep our connections small, not too many people. So, okay, all right. Anything else to announce at all? Okay, all right. Welcome, Allison. Looking forward to seeing you on Monday. Very good.
Looking forward. Yeah.
Yep. Safe travels to you, please. Yeah. Double mask, I think, coming out of Arizona. Oy, oy, oy.
Yep, I know. Mask, gloves, everything, the whole shebang.
Oh, however, the airlines are being very careful. And the airport, you know, you just walk past people, and the airports are really not so bad. They're really not all that crowded. So you'll be fine. You'll be
Good.
fine. And
Right.
be out of doors a lot, and that will be good here. So,
Yeah.
and it's cool.
I know. I'm so looking forward.
I mean, it's hot
110
today,
and 111. Oh, it's nice. I'm so looking forward to it.
yeah, very good. All right, my friends, take care. I'll see you next Wednesday then.
Yeah.
All right. All
Right.
right. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, let's just chant out so that we finish. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Karma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassed, I vow to become it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Edison.
Sleep well tonight. Take care.